Welcome to week 5 in our study in the book of Genesis. So we'll pick it up again on slide 85 and finish day 4. It is only here that the moon is called the lesser light and the sun the greater light. You know, pagan religion have always considered these as gods, even up to our weekly days, Monday and Sunday. And of course, some of the Scandinavian countries, like I'm from Sweden, of course, they have Thor's Day, which is Thor, Thursday. And then, of course, Freya, who was Thor's, well, she was a female goddess in a sense, so you have Friday after that. Same thing with Monday and Sunday. Lights are impersonal, so they serve as lamps and are thus in service to God. And they also help us, of course. The chief goal is to separate day and night. They're not an aid to man in any form of astrology. That's satanic, and we ought all to stay away from that. I'm surprised to see on Facebook people, claiming to be believers, and here's your daily horoscope. My mother did that, and I told her you got to stop that, and she did. But anyway, nothing to do with astrology. At best, we may call them seasonal signs. Moses might have avoided calling them sun and moon, and therefore calling them lesser light and the greater light, since maybe pagan religions, going back to Egypt, Egyptology and all that stuff, might have considered them as deities. So to avoid referring to the sun and the moon, I believe that's one reason why he called it lesser light, and of course greater light, to avoid having any association with paganism whatsoever. All right, in chapter 1, verses 20 through 23, day 5, God created all things that fly and swim according to its kind. And that is a biological truth. We call that biogenesis. We produce after ourselves, as do animals. Every kind reproduces after its own kind. You never have two different kinds mating, giving birth to a third kind that didn't exist prior to that kind, and so forth. God gave His created living things life, but He also gave them the capability to sustain themselves, or we can sustain ourselves. Of course, in Colossians 1, Jesus holds all things together. He's the ultimate sustainer, but biologically, reproducing after its own kind is definitely the case. Now, concerning humanity, for example, human cloning or homosexuality for that matter, the plumbing doesn't fit. This is sort of like the credit card answers if you did a radio show or called in, just a few pointers. The plumbing doesn't fit. Nobody got here through homosexual union. One will live longer if one stops this practice. And of course, male proteins do not work in another male body, period. Human cloning is also clearly unnatural. Not to mention the motive behind human cloning. Loyola Marymount in Chicago, they now have a master's degree in bioethics that you can do online. So if you're interested in abortion, cloning, physician-assisted suicide, bio-life issues and ethics, great field to get involved with. In any event, God bless them. Animal rights, of course, is something where many of us lack. This is the first usage of the word blessed in the scriptures, and is not used of man at this point. It's only used of animals, interestingly. Verse 24 through 31, a summary there. Day 6, you have the creation of land animals. Living creatures is sometimes used for souls, living creatures. Now, do animals have souls? That's something you can think about. I think you can say yes on one hand and no on the other. After all, if we are, to have life, God breathed through the nostrils, if you will, of Adam, and of course he became a living creature. So can you be alive, like be a creature without a soul? But then again, where do you draw the line between your loving cat, your dog, and your horse? What about a snail? What about a bat? Those are living things too. But we know that there will be animals in heaven. Did they come from here, or were they created there? I'm not sure. In any event, good arguments on both sides. In 126, of Genesis. Some use this to prove the Trinity, again, due to its plural form. The Hebrew at best implies, like I said last time, a plural majesty of the Creator who spoke the universe into existence ex nihilo, from nothing. Special revelation, the New Testament later on adds more information about this plural majesty. So in a sense, from a Trinitarian point of view, you could make that later in the New Testament, but certainly not by just reading Genesis chapter 1. In verse 27, you have man's dominion over the earth, and of course needing much improvement there. 29 through 30 seems to imply that the first man and woman were vegetarians, just on those verses alone. Day 6 in chapter 2, the first 3 verses, you have the Creator created a creature, which is man, in God's image, the imago Dei, in Latin they call it. And the imago Dei was not erased in Eden, but rather effaced. There are some philosophers, philosophical theologians, pastors, priests, you name it, who believe that the image of God was completely erased. And I don't think so. If it was, I don't think we could recognize much at all. We would just be totally out to lunch. So I would say that it's effaced, somewhat diminished due to the fall, but not completely erased. The imago Dei is fixed upon all persons, of course. This is one reason where you have James saying not to curse a man on one side of our mouth while, blessing and praising God on the other. You can see in James 3:9, where it says, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers, this should not be. And so, of course, the tongue is a powerful thing, and we have to remember that God doesn't want us to curse even a pagan, an atheist, a person of a different faith, because they too are created in His image. And I believe that's what James is getting at. Don't curse people with the imago Dei. Many theologians believe that the image of God somehow is stamped both on body and soul. If so, think about cremation. If it's true that we're sort of stamped in a mystical way that I can't explain. If so, who are we to burn the image of God during cremation? Number 2, in the past, cremation was a pagan practice. It was never taught by the early church. But we are, I would say, we are so westernized, and that's what we have to remember. Christianity is a Eastern religion, Middle East, the Near East. It is not a Western religion by any means. Anyway, we are created in His likeness. What that means does not mean that He is 6'2", or that He has human characteristics like you and I do. We refer to these as transferable attributes, which indicate, one example of a transferable attribute would be reason, the capacity to love. We are not all loving, and we're certainly not omniscient, but we do have knowledge. We have presence, but we are not omnipresent. Omnipresent by any stretch. And in the same way, we possess the logos. We have logic. We have morality. Those are transferable characteristics. And then, of course, non-transferable characteristics would be the omnis, O-M-N-I, which means all in Latin. So omnipotence, He alone is all-powerful. Omnipresence, He alone is present everywhere, but He's not part of everything, like pantheism. So, having said that concerning male and female, God is what we call asexual, neither male nor female. Very, very interesting. In John 4:24, of course, we have God is spirit, and we must worship Him in spirit and in truth. Moving on to 89, slide 89, we are now at Genesis 2, verses 4 through 7. This is the history of the heavens. History of man comes next in the form of the beginning of human genealogy. In the latter portion of verse 5, there was no man to till the ground. what does this do to theistic evolution? Something to think about here. Could there have existed a pre-Adamic race? Pre meaning before Adam. I'm not of that view at all. If so, there would have had to have been death before Adam and Eve died. And remember, they were not supposed to die. I mean, God foreknew that they would blow it, and God had already put in a restoration plan. Before Genesis 1:1, it was already planned before time that Christ would have to come and save us. In that sense, could there be any death before Adam fell? I don't think so, because part of the fall of man in the Garden of Eden was, of course, creation was cursed, and death has now entered the universe. So Adam and Eve brought death into the world, which, of course, followed from their disobedience. If death existed prior to Adam's death, then Paul's argument in the book of Romans would be null and void. Paul's verbiage concerning Adam being the first man and Jesus the second, so a redeeming man or redeeming type of Adam, would make no sense if Adam was the first man and there were other people living before Adam. You know, I have a friend of mine who his kids are in Catholic school, and they invited me over and asked me some questions, and they said, you know, some of the nuns and priests here teach that Adam was an ape. Do you think that's possible? And they were serious in asking me. I says, you guys are not kidding, no? And they said, what about, you know, Noah's Ark? Do you think that was literal? Could you believe in evolution or theistic evolution? The idea that God has, you know, used evolutionary means to bring us about. Well, there's changes within a species. We call that microevolution. You know, there's zebras, there's different types of Shetland ponies and so forth. If they mate, they will give birth to a horse. There is, so to speak, similarities within the same species. So we call that microevolution in a nutshell. Macro is from one species to another, and not a shred of evidence as far as that's concerned. But I reminded my Catholic, well, they're actually Protestants, and kids go to Catholic school because it's apparently a school to die for. And I says, well, you know, in the scriptures, it would be wrong to say that if Adam was an ape, because the ape would have to be created in the image of God. Secondly, what separated Adam from the beasts or just the animal world was that he was supposed to, of course, so to speak, be in control of them. You know what I mean? Same thing, tilling the ground and so forth. So Eve is also the mother of all living. It's hard to say all living if there were other people living before Adam and Eve. So I don't go with that view at all. In chapter 2, verse 7, man was formed out of the dust, and to it we shall go. God breathed into man, and he became again a living being. And it seems that all living things require a soul. Living being is also used of animal kingdom in chapter 1, verse 24, like I mentioned. Some argue again here, you can see in slide 90, perhaps animals do make it into the realm of immortality. After all, they don't sin. They are without a law, so how could you judge them? Thus, they need no redemption. Just as a side note, so you've heard it. What about Eden, the Garden of Eden? I often make jokes to the Bible colleges out here. The original Garden of Eden was actually the Garden of Sweden, you know, my neck of the woods. Of course it's not. It might be in Turkey somewhere. In any event, we're not sure where Eden is located. Some thinkers believe it to be somewhere in the region of ancient Iraq. Some have said, you know, maybe in Turkey somewhere. You know, depends on who you read. And so only two rivers that flowed from Eden are found today. That would be Euphrates and Tigris. The other two, we don't have them, probably wiped out in the flood. Now, why such a location or desert? It was watered from below and upward. It seems to have been a greenhouse climate worldwide prior to the global flood of Noah. If you read the first couple of verses in Genesis where it says that God created a firmamentum, to separate the waters above from the waters below, it would seem to suggest that perhaps the original planet, again, you got the planet here and a water layer canopy surrounding it, and of course radiation from the sun is the #1 killer, setting aside 10 minutes a day for vitamin D. If there was a water canopy, of course, it would filter out some of the radiation. Maybe that's why Methuselah lived so long, and Adam too. So those are possibilities. And of course, they have found mammoths frozen in ice up in Siberia, and they have literally cut them out of the ice, thawed them up, if you will. These are thousands of years old. They cut open their stomach, and they found fresh vegetation in their stomach. So they died instantaneously. Why? Frozen in water. For sure, a climactic event. Some would say that, well, that was part of the Ice Age. Some say the flood. Where did the water come from? Also interesting is this, that asparagus tree, we found that in the fossil record, up to 80 feet tall. And how do they get to be so big? If you could grow asparagus tree today inside of a greenhouse, you're lucky if it even reaches 6 feet, you know, which is nothing. So why were the dinosaurs so big? You know, many lizards, they say, if you can just extend their lifetime, they will continue to grow because they grow until they die. How true that is, I don't know. But when you look at the age before Noah's Ark and you look at the age following the flood, you notice that the years just decrease in man. So it might be that, you know, the original planet before the fall and before the flood, for sure, was a global tropical atmosphere, the entire planet, you know, sort of like Hawaii, and just beautiful. And of course, you can get that right out of the first 7 verses in Genesis. Page 92. You have the Eden rivers today, where you see Baghdad, Iran, Syria to the left, and Saudi Arabia down at the bottom. So you can look at that. You'll see the Tigris River, Euphrates right below it. All right, Genesis 2, 9, verse 9 through 17. This was, again, the perfect home, the perfect garden for the first created perfect couple. This special and first home for our human ancestry demonstrates how God is faithful, that He cares, and also shows His power and transcendence. God did not just create the world, He also sustains it. God even cared about aesthetics, you know, the study of beauty. Eden was pleasant to the eyes, but the fall of man brought much of that to an end. Nonetheless, just like man is fallen, so is creation. I mentioned already that the image of God is only effaced, not erased. The same is true of creation in that sense. It is still beautiful, but fallen. Can you just imagine what it looked like before the fall? Yeah. Take note of 2 special trees in chapter 2, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Does this mean, though, that the second tree was evil or educational for evil? No. In the New Jerusalem, there will also be a great river and a tree of life that changes its fruit on a monthly basis. So there you have another tree. I'm not going to read the verses in slide 94. We will go into a summary on slide 95 instead. Notice that it is God who determined that it's not good for man to dwell alone, referring to Adam. Yet we're not told that Adam was dissatisfied really with his surroundings. We are created as social creatures. We're all different and unique. Yet there's no partiality within God. There's no distinction at the foot of the cross. We're all equal in His sight. There's a difference in function, but ontologically we're all human, just like there's only one race, and so forth. So we're all equal in His sight. On the other hand, Adam did have a helper. He had God, a superior helper. The animals were also His helpers. They were, of course, inferior helpers, yet a suitable helper was necessary, and that's, of course, Eve. In Hebrew, the word suitable suggests a polarity, like the North Pole is suitable to the South Pole. Hence, one without the other sort of implies an incompleteness. So Adam did not get to choose Eve. God chose Eve for him. I think that's really, really interesting. Yet we are free to choose our own life partners. Of course, God foreknows our lives in advance, so it's not like He's surprised. He who made them from the beginning made them male and female. The love of husband and wife is the force that welds society together. Let me say that again. This is from St. John Chrysostom. He says, quote, "He who made them from the beginning made them male and female. The love of husband and wife is the force that welds society together." To that I have to say amen. Then we move on to verses 23 and 25. Man, or Adam, was created out of the dust, and therefore he's unique. Now the woman, which is Eve, is also unique in that she was not created like Adam at all. She came from his side. The word bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh indicates, in a sense, in weakness and strength. Bones would be, of course, the strength, and flesh would be the weakness in the Hebrew. Bones to be strong, flesh, again, weakness. As for nakedness, this refers to more than physical nudity. The verse is claiming a total transparency between this primal couple. You have that in Baker, page 13. All right, then we have Genesis 3, 1 through 2, the fall of man in creation up to this point. All is great. Once man arrives on the scene of history, it all goes downhill, and of course, this is where we're introduced to Lucifer, that serpent of old, the Beelzebub, the deceiver, the chief of demons. Serpent in Hebrew is nakash. Nakash derives from the Hebrew word nekesh, which means brass or shining. Follow me on this. I don't believe it was a literal serpent in that tree. Don't shut off the computer. At that moment, at least not at that second. Eve was conversing with the serpent, which means nakash. Okay, remember now it derives from nekesh, which means brass or shining. Why do I not hold that the serpent was a literal serpent? The curse upon the serpent was to crawl and eat dust. But if it was already a serpent crawling and eating dust, as they do today, it wouldn't be much of a curse. So it's possible that this figure in that tree was a shining looking figure, perhaps even angelic, or maybe even dragon-like, I don't know. Some argue that crawling and eating dust, of course, are metaphorical statements which clearly suggest submission. So either it was a serpent that didn't crawl around and eat dust, because that was the curse, or it wasn't. So you can make up your mind on that. Interesting study if you look into serpent and travel down etymologically and find out what's the original root words and terms used for that. Very interesting study. Now, as for Satan, there are only 4 chapters of the Bible where he is not present. In the first 2 chapters, Genesis, and the last 2 chapters in Revelation. Now, since the creation of man until Revelation 20, he is an enemy to be reckoned with. He was the morning star who fell from heaven. Christ himself says, "I saw Lucifer fall like lightning." Literal angel that went nuts. He is an absolute ego psychomaniac, and he's out to seek and destroy all of us. Consider his alluring and deceiving, yet influencing role in that the third of the angels left the abode in heaven with him. Imagine being created in heaven, being an angel, and all the other angels are there, and then Lucifer rebels, and all of a sudden, you know, he's able to, in the presence of God, he's actually able to say, "Listen, you guys should come with me." And they leave in the presence of God. We haven't been in that presence. We're not there. But imagine being called home, and you had free will to actually get kicked out of heaven. I don't believe we will have free will to reject him. I believe being sealed with the Holy Spirit, it's done. We will not forfeit our own salvation. I believe the free will within that salvation moment since you got saved is frozen. You can't give it up. Certainly not up there. But just think of how alluring he is, that he either deceived a third of the angels, or they were like right with him, but in the presence of God. I find that amazing. In any event, we will pick it up next on slide 103, where we'll get into some archaeology. Meanwhile, good job on the papers you guys uploaded. A+ on both. Stay tuned for the next one. All right. Lord bless.